Unfortunately, because I've been working on that native representations feature, I think it's a little bit broken at the moment on my computer. So if we load up a file, under IFC representations, what it currently imports by default is the model, the 3D model's body geometry. In other words, the body or shape of the object. IFC can store many multiple geometric representations for a single object. So for example, for a beam, yes, you might want to see the body of the beam, which can be the full, let's say, circular hollow section of the beam, and you might see an extruded circle, but you might also want the axis of the beam. So in other words, a single line that represents it. And that can be used for takeoff purposes. It can be used for structural analytical model purposes. And for their purposes, the full circle doesn't matter. You know, they're just after a datum. If you're laying down pipes, for example, you don't actually need the full circle. You need to know, depending on how you're laying down the pipe, you might need to know the datum at the bottom of the pipe, or the top of the pipe, or the middle of the pipe, or things like that. So other programs do export some representations, and unfortunately, many other programs get this wrong. So this feature may or may not work depending on where your IFC comes from. Under object properties, you can see the possible representations for an object. You can see it has models, various model this is called a representation context, a subcontext, and a target view. So this one has a model body, which we're looking at right now. That's the default one. But it also has a box model, like a bounding box, and it has an axis representation, which is probably a straight line, and the graph view says what it's meant, the target view it's meant to be used in. In other words, not viewing it in 3D, but instead as a sort of 2D graph. Pressing this button on my computer will break, but on your computer it probably won't break, and it will actually load up the particular representation. So you can see that the 3D geometry, once I click that, disappears, and on your computer it should be replaced by a line. In my case, it's, oh, there you go, there's the line. So you can see that's the line which it has been replaced by. And if I go into here, you can see that the name has been changed to Model Axis Graph View Native Mesh. So it understands that this is not a body representation. It's actually an axis representation. And I can switch back to the body, and voila, I have my body representation again. And switch back to the axis, switch back to the body. And many programs do export this added information. And you can also create it yourself. So if I start a blank file, and this time I'm gonna, let's assign that to be a wall, maybe. Throw that in there. Let's see if I can remember how this works. I can, at the moment it has no representation, but I can add a new representation. So we'll add an axis representation, a graph view axis representation. And I press add, and you can see it disappears. I move into edit mode, and now I can draw manually. Tedious, I know. There will be new features to make this automated. And I've just drawn a single edge to represent my graph view. It's sort of invisible because it's just a single edge. Tell you what, I'll move it up. I'll move it down so it's more visible. And I think I've done that wrong. I think I have done that wrong, because I think I should have added a body. This is still kind of half-baked. There we go. So I've added back my body representation, and it's resumed my cube. I select it again, and I go back to my axis representation. Anyway, it's something which this workflow needs to be tidied up. But essentially, you can see that there are two possible representations for it to have. Now, by default, they will not export unless you have defined the context in your project settings. And that's just the way that IFC works. Now, it is extra clicks at the moment. Again, there's a huge amount of UX work to be done. So over here, you can see here, geometric representation context. Right now, we only have a body representation, but we can add the axis representation. So now we know that our model can have either a body or an axis. And hopefully now we can switch between the two. Let's go back to body, model view. Nope, can't switch between the two. That's because I've stuffed this up. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense, that there can be multiple representations. And hopefully if I export that, you can see it in the file. And let's go and import it one more time. And you can see here that it has, when I've imported it, it's detected that I actually have two representations. One is an axis, one is a body. And I switch to that, you can see that it's got my line there. So switch, 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 switch. So you can see it stores that information in the IFC file. Now, these are both what's called a model context. At the moment, there are only two contexts available in the IFC schema. You can have more, but that's kind of uncharted territory. You can either have a plan or a model. Plan is, even though it says plan, I think it refers to any 2D representation. And then you can pick a particular subcontext. Now, there is actually a sort of like a decision tree here. Like there are certain things which you should be able to do in model space, and some things you can do in plan space. And if you select this combination and this combination, it will work. But this combination, it just doesn't make sense. Like a clearance zone for like, let's say a maintenance clearance zone for access to a piece of equipment. That makes sense both in plan and model, but something like a center of gravity, maybe it doesn't make sense in plan. It might make sense in model, or a I don't know. And I don't know. There's some decision tree behind here that's sort of half implemented in BlenderBIM right now. If you look in the code, it will explain to you which combinations work, which ones don't, and that's slowly being improved as more clarity is being found. Representations is kind of experimental. There's almost zero BIM applications out there which let you edit representations with the freedom that BlenderBIM does. You can't just create them willy-nilly. Now that's both good and bad. That means that although you can create them in BlenderBIM, there's no guarantee that they will work in other programs. There is one particular representation which does work with BlenderBIM, which is the plan annotation. And I think you can choose any one of these. It should work, like plan view, reflected ceiling view, or anything. The annotation one, what that does is, let's say, if I go back to my body view, let's say this is the door, for example. What I can do is I can create a plan view representation of it, which, of course, my computer's feature's not really working. But if I did add that representation, maybe I know what I need to do. I think I need to context enable plans, add it in there, and now I should be able to add it. Nope, not broken feature. There we go. Anyway, if I was able to add it, I should be able to draw, let's say, a door swing, and the annotative, the documentation tool will pick up that door swing and it'll say, okay, in a plan view, let's not cut the entire door and let's just draw the door swing. So that's what happens in here. So for example, that door was a proper 3D rendered door, but only the door swing is shown. And I'll show you that in the file itself because it will make a bit more sense. Now, it is possible. There are some buttons here which let you create your own context and essentially write out a single shape back to the file. So let's say you want to edit just this door in the original IFC file, but nothing else. You can press that button. It's a very dangerous button right now because it's so experimental. Like no other BIM program currently lets you do that. But you can try click it and see what happens. There are a couple other features down here, again to do with representations. Those parametric representations we talked about earlier. Previously, there was this button called Is Swept Solid, which let you specify if I had a cube, for example. Just go to the cube. I can specify that this is actually going to be an extrusion, not a mesh. So I check that box, and then I say it's made out of one extrusion, not multiple extrusions. And I can say this is the outer curve of my extrusion. Inner curves allow me to have voids. And then I select an extrusion distance. So now you can see if I press that, that's my outer curve, that's my extrusion. However, this feature will be removed in favor of the new native representation thing, which I'm building right now, which will support not just these types of extrusions, which have an arbitrary curve, but it will support rectangular extrusions, circular extrusions, and other parametric extrusions natively. So this feature is here at the moment, which does work. Like exactly as I showed you before, preserving the extrusions, I can go and export this now, and it will come back. But this code will be removed in favor of this is native option, which will store all of the relevant items as vertex groups.